think we should get started. Please.
That's okay.
For those of you in the room who don't know who I am Sam Magnus. I did farm at Lisland, Saskatchewan. Actually rented my farm out this year. I am the vice president of the Federal Conservative Party. Was the vice president of the Alliance Party probably throughout most of the Alliance Party years. Actually went on to the National Council, or at that time it was called the Executive Council of the Reform Party. And our terms are actually supposed to be 3 two-year terms. But for me it's been 14 years because every time we changed parties, we started over. And being vice president of the Alliance Party, I was appointed by Stephen Harper at that time, not Prime Minister. He's the Prime Minister now, of course, but I was appointed by Stephen to sit on the council that put the two parties together. At that point, I think, I was just telling Kevin, I think the Alliance Party had like 225,000 members, and the old PC Party had between 25,000 and 35,000. So there was a bit of an issue there, but the parties came together and very successfully. And as you all know, we are now in a majority situation with the Prime Minister Harper. And for those of you who live in this riding federally, you will have seen today that your member of Parliament is now a cabinet minister, and which looks really good for us. A farm boy, which is also good. And there wasn't, as far as I'm concerned, a real major cabinet shuffle. I think everything that happened today was good. So I guess that remains to be seen. We will be focusing on one thing for the next while, and that will be trying to get that whole Senate issue sorted out. It's been a big issue for us. My role in the Alliance Party, and now the Conservative Party, has been to be a mediator. There's a couple of people here that I did battle with. Ken Perot, where's Hozak?
Right here.
Danny Hozak. But you know what? They're really good friends of mine now. So it's just part of what we do in a political party. There are some things that you have to do. You have to follow your constitution, and we are all conservatives. I'm sure everybody here is a conservative, whether you are provincially Wild Rose or PC or whatever. We're all conservatives. And it's always good to see so many conservatives get together for a meeting like this. One of the things that I realized fairly quickly in Saskatchewan when I got onto the council was that the only way that we would ever win any seats federally was if we had strong riding associations. We had good leaders, very strong leaders. We had very strong candidates, but in a lot of cases we had no organization. You can get away with not having a strong organization for a little while, but not very long. The odd time you might even elect a member of Parliament or a member to the legislature without having a strong organization backing them, but that won't last too long. And so the thing that we really focused on in Saskatchewan, we were told back in the Reform era, we would never elect more than 6 Conservative MPs in Saskatchewan. Well, I can't remember the year, but shortly into the Alliance Party, we had 12 out of 14 MPs, Alliance MPs. Then we went to 13 out of 14, and that's where we've been since the Conservative Party has been founded. So, and the majority of the reason for that, I'd say, is because we have strong riding associations. We have to have, in our conservative movements, whether it's provincial or federal, we have to have strong riding associations. A couple of reasons why. The media does not carry our message at all. So we need to have our people spread that word, one-on-one. And that's basically how this party, Conservative Party, got into power. And I am anticipating that's how your Wild Rose Party will come to power. Tonight I want to recognize Rick Strang. Rick is the MLA here. Rick is the person who organized this tonight, and I've known Rick for probably way too long. We go back to that little fight we had with the Canadian Wheat Board. We were on the same side of the issue there, of course, and I've always appreciated Rick and the number of the folks here. How many of you here were candidates for the Wild Rose Party? Okay, quite a number. Good. Good. We're just really glad to have you here. It's better in here than outside tonight anyway because of the big wind. So you have an excuse to be here. Tonight we're privileged to have Kevin Avram with us. I'm just going to read a bit about what he's done. And it's just a short little thing compared to what he has done. But first of all, the theme of tonight's workshop is paradigms, power levers, and the process of change. We'll be looking at the way special interest groups and political parties shape the attitudes and expectations of ordinary citizens. Remember the 13 years the Liberal Party was in existence federally? They were doing a lot of social engineering and tried to do that to us, tried to convince us that they were always right. Of course, the workshop will be led by Kevin Avram. Kevin was founder, developer, and CEO of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. He designed the Canadian Taxpayers Federation communications, sales, and marketing strategies. Later, Kevin served as president and communications coordinator for the Prairie Centre, an organization that was established to play an important role in the elimination of the Canadian wheat board monopoly. Kevin has worked in the US, in Europe. He's also been involved with CAPLA and the Landowner Radio. Tonight it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Kevin Avram.
Anybody interrupt me anytime you want tonight. This is very informal. This is not really a speech at all or a presentation. This is a mini workshop. So it means discussion is wide open. Anybody has an idea, if you get a cloud over your head with a word in it and want to say it out loud, just have at it. In some cases, the point or the question you might raise, we may be dealing with later on. And if we do, I'll certainly mention that. But please feel free to comment or criticize. Feel free to criticize or to call into question. There's some of the things that I'm going to say in the presentation that some of you might not agree with. And if you don't, that's fine with me. The objective is not to get anybody to agree with anything. The objective tonight is dialogue. There's a lot of depth in this room. I don't expect to be able to come to this room and tell anybody here something you don't already know. I don't think that's going to really happen tonight. My objective this evening, after talking to Rick and thinking this through and asking myself, well, what could we constructively do if we come and have a mini workshop? It's to adjust your perspective. And that's why the first PowerPoint slide is up on the screen. It's that the angle from which we see something actually determines what we see. That's always the case. And when we shift the angle from which we see, we actually see something different. You can take a man or a woman and put him on top of a mountain and let him look at something or her look at something. And they will see it differently. Their perspective is different than if they're down in a valley or halfway up the slope somewhere. Perspective doesn't just determine what's there. Perspective determines what we see. The dilemma that individuals... Rick gave me this as my pointer. I don't know if he was expecting somebody who was going to take a punch at maybe this is what he had. The dilemma that individuals possessing a keen interest in politics and policy will always face is that political parties, as a matter of perspective, again, perspective determines what we see. Political parties, as a matter of perspective, create policy manuals instead of engineering schematics. All political parties are like that. The Wild Rose Party is not unique to that. The CCF, the NDP, their follow-up If you track the history of their policy manual, some of those documents are absolutely fascinating. The Liberal Party, but regardless of what the party is, whether you're green or blue or red, the focus, the perspective, is a policy manual, not an engineering schematic. The challenge that that will pose at some point is that policy manuals tell you where you want to go. They describe the perceived destination. The limitation or the weakness is that policy manuals never tell you how to get there. That's what an engineering schematic is. That's what this picture is. Just imagine if you wanted to build a house and you hired somebody to build it for you, and that person didn't use schematics or blueprints or drawings. You just happened to go out to the lot where he or she was going to build you a house one day, and you find this guy, or he and his workers, or she and her workers. You find them standing beside a great big pile of lumber and assorted other building materials. And they tell you that they're full of enthusiasm and they're going to build you a house. Now, you could have the best, well-meaning people in the world standing there, sincere. But if they don't have a blueprint, at some point they're going to hit some obstacles. Back to perspective. This picture here, this is actually a picture from the inside of an old abandoned farm home. But if you're standing inside here, if I'm standing inside here, this is our perspective. We can only see what our perspective permits us to see. Let me go to this. For the politically active and members of political parties, the absence of a well-known schematic, and when I say well-known, I mean familiar. Like when you get up in the morning, a lot of us have schematics in our heads about our jobs. If some of you are business people or farmers or ranchers, you have a schematic in your head. When you get up in the morning or when you think of the next month or the next season, you have a schematic. It's there. And the schematic is what tells you what to do next. Now, if you got up in the morning and you didn't have a schematic, you would have to come up with some other way to make decisions and arrive at conclusions. The question becomes how? What do you do? If you're a political party or politically active or members of political parties, the absence of a well-known schematic. Now, when I mean well-known schematic, I mean a plan or a strategy, a drawn-out process that tells you what to do next. If you don't have that, what will happen is you will end up with an unspoken assumption. Nobody will say it, but you will end up with an unspoken assumption that you are actually engaged in a war of ideas. Some people will even say that term. They'll use that phrase. They'll say politics is a war of ideas. And if you think about why people think that, you've got 2 or 3 parties involved. They're all individuals who are smart and talented, intelligent, and they've put together policy manuals, and then they clash about policies. After this war of ideas perspective becomes fixed, that's this. This is our perspective. This is a caricature or a metaphor for a perspective that politics and politically active people are engaged in a war of ideas. So this is how we see. This is what we see. After this war of ideas perspective becomes fixed, established, new or additional information will enhance the precision with which we see, but it won't change what we see. This is really significant here. Some of the stuff that we're going to talk about tonight is really subtle, but I would submit to you it's quite profound. And I encourage you to think it through or challenge me or challenge anyone else in the room so we can talk this through. Because when we get to the end of this evening, this workshop, the objective is not to have people knowing a bunch of new things. It's to be able to walk out the door where we have a perspective where we can see something other than from this angle. That's the objective. Let me go over this again. After this war of ideas perspective becomes fixed, a lot of you guys are MLAs. You get up in the morning, you think of yourselves as being in a war of ideas, a policy war. Once that's your perspective to what you're doing and what's going on, and even to what your party's doing, new or additional information that you gain, either about yourself, about your opponent, about the policy, it is all going to be seen through the same perspective that you've already got. It means that you will see with greater precision. If this is my perspective and I'm able to see with greater precision, what it would mean is I'm still looking at exactly the same thing, but I'll know what kind of crop that is. If I take a stem out of here and put it under a microscope and take a look at it, I'll have more knowledge about what I'm looking at, but my perspective isn't any different. If I know what kind of clouds those are, what's in them, what their altitude is, I can see all that. So I go home at the end of the day thinking to myself, boy, I learned a heck of a lot today. I learned this and this and this and this and this. But you know what? I'm still looking through a hole that's about 3 feet wide and about 5 feet high. I can't see anything. I don't have any options that are outside my perspective, because perspective limits what we see. All of us are like that. And there's no way for it not to be like that. Look at this. Let me flash back here. See that picture on the right? Perspective, how you see something. Standing in exactly the same place. Perspective, how you see something. This is the old perspective. This is a new perspective. This new perspective is allowing us to see something we couldn't see before. Restating this statement that perspective doesn't focus on the precision of our sight. Perspective has more to do with the angle or the way we see something than it does with what we actually see.
Kevin,
Yes.
I always seem to, we struggle or get trapped in the idea that it's the path of least resistance when we're developing the policy. Or it becomes easier to narrow the perspective rather than broaden the mandate. And so how do we avoid that trap? Are you going to talk about that later? Or?
Yeah, I am, Doug. What I'm actually going to try to do here tonight is this presentation actually has 3 parts. Sam mentioned paradigms. This first part is actually about perspective and paradigms and the way we see, and even why what you just described happens. It happens all over, and the question becomes, well, why? The second thing we're going to look at are the levers to which we have access that enable us to do things or achieve things. And the third thing we're going to look at is what each of you here as members or parts of a constituency association or MLAs or candidates or part of a party, we're going to give you some ideas that you may want to consider implementing. The third part doesn't go into a lot of detail, but it's there. Yes, Doug. That does come up. Fixed perspectives impose limits on the way we think. And it does that by creating boundaries. If you think of that picture we just looked at and looking out the door, there are boundaries. We're looking through boundaries. If this guy here, this farmer, if he was told to move 1,600 bushels of grain, and here's another farmer, each of these guys' perspective would have boundaries that form a fixed way of thinking about what that involves. Now obviously these are years apart. That isn't the point we're talking about. We're not talking about years apart. We're talking about perspective. How do you see something? Because what we see. Either farmer could gain knowledge or additional expertise concerning the equipment being used. You could have this guy who knows all about diesel engines or air-conditioned cabs. This guy might know all about replacing wagon wheels or taking care of horses and harness and rehabilitating horses or harness. But that wouldn't change his perspective toward what he's doing. What it would do is it would just give him more knowledge about what he's doing that would be contained within the boundaries of the perspective. So the perspective imposes limits on how we think. When told to haul 1,600 bushels, this farmer would immediately access a mental roadmap that tells him to think about horses, leather harness, and a four-wheeled wagon that travels on prairie trails while carrying about 75 bushels at a time. He's not a dumb man, but this is a man that this is the perspective. There's a lot of us sitting in this room who had granddads or great-granddads. This was how they viewed the world. Trusted thought patterns become mental roadmaps. What happens to us is that the perspective we have on something ends up becoming a trusted thought pattern. We begin to trust what these thought patterns are that are in our head. Think of looking through that door. We begin to trust what we see, and we think that's reality because that's our perspective. The mental roadmap in the mind of the second farmer would make him think of a 30-wheel tandem that moves 1,600 bushels per load. The first farmer would never think of a diesel-powered tandem with an air-conditioned cab that travels at unbelievable speeds. These ideas would never come into his head, and the reason is because his mental roadmap, his fixed perspective, doesn't let him see that. He can't see it. It's not that he's dumb, it's that he can't see it. A mental roadmap is a paradigm. A paradigm is a set of fixed assumptions that shapes the way we evaluate situations and see the world. This is an important concept, a paradigm. These assumptions work like a kind of ruler or yardstick that we use to measure the things that we see and do. Every one of us lives in a paradigm, whether we like it or not. There's no way not to. Paradigms shape the way we understand our limitations. Paradigms is what enables us to understand our options and our opportunities that are being presented to us. So if our perspective, if our paradigm on our options as a political party or a candidate or your options as a constituency association, if you're looking through that 3-foot wide door, however wide that door is, and you have a paradigm fixed by that, that's the limitation of your options. Paradigms are created through contacts with family, other people, books, TV, newscasts, and by interacting with what we understand reality to be. Personal experience. You touch something, your hand gets burned, you never go back there again. That's part of your paradigm. It's part of the way we view reality. When asked to haul 1,600 bushels, the paradigm held by the first farmer led him to think of horses and a wooden wagon. The paradigm of the second farmer led him to think of the diesel-powered tandem. Both farmers could possess the same level of intelligence. In other words, they could have the same IQ. Let's say both of them are geniuses, 150 IQ, which is very possible. It means that the options they understand themselves as having in order to move grain is not based on how smart they are, because they both have the same intelligence. Therefore, it has to be based on something else. The question becomes what? The paradigm. The paradigm is how we see. It's the options we understand ourselves to have and the limitations we believe constrain us. When the fixed assumptions that make up a paradigm dramatically change or undergo realignment due to new discoveries or insights, it's referred to as a paradigm shift. What happens is that the yardstick that we use to measure things shifts, it changes. I'll give you a couple of examples. This is a great movie that I love. It's actually a lousy script, but the concepts in the movie are just fabulous. If anybody likes movies in here, if you ever get a chance to get this movie rented or buy it, watch it. It's called The Final Countdown. It stars Kirk Douglas, Martin Sheen, James Ferrantino, and this is Catherine Ross and Charles Durning, who I just really quite love. Unfortunately, he passed away. This movie is about the USS Nimitz. The Nimitz goes through a freak electrical storm and is thrown back in time to December the 6th, 1941, just as the Japanese Naval Task Force is about to sweep down on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. This is a picture of it. It's a big aircraft carrier covered with Tomcats. Tomcats fly about Mach 2. When these guys discover, using radar technology and other things I won't take the time to get into, but when they discover where they are and what time it's at, what year it is, and they also know that the Japanese Naval Task Force, a whole bunch of carriers loaded to the gills with airplanes, is coming to attack the United States, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. They launched 2 Tomcats. Now, Tomcats are F-16s. They fly about Mach 2. I don't know if there's anybody in here who can say what kind of climb they have, but my understanding is they can climb at about 50,000 feet in a matter of...
They're F-14s.
Or F-14s, pardon me. I do that. Their rate of climb is incredible. What happens is in the movie, they launch 2 of these, and there's a wonderful scene where these 2 Tomcats are flying just above the water. And you guys know what these jets sound like when they got to just going full bore. And these 2 jets are flying over the Pacific Ocean, and these 3 people are on this yacht just enjoying the sunshine. In the movie, this guy is the chairman of the Congressional Armed Services Committee. He's a politician, but he's a politician in the 1930s and 40s. These modern Tomcats fly over top of this yacht. Shoot! And in the movie, these guys are standing there, and this guy says to Durning, he says, "Look at their speed!" And Durning, who's the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, he says, "They have U.S. markings." He says, "Where did these rocket planes come from?" Because he had no knowledge of them. The Japanese have also launched a couple of planes. They're Zeros. Zeros were made by Mitsubishi. They cruise somewhere just over 200 miles an hour would be their cruising speed. Their job, these 2 planes, their job is to fly out ahead of all the Japanese aircraft carriers and find anything with a radio and kill them or sink them. And the reason is they don't want anybody to know that this huge task force is coming in order to sweep down on Pearl Harbor. These planes find the yacht, but the Tomcats end up there too. These 2 Tomcats literally, in the film, they sweep in behind these 2 Zeros from behind. They actually climb high, dive down, and literally fly circles around them. Quite literally on the movie. And these Japanese pilots are wondering, what the heck is going on here? One of them still foolishly makes an attempt to shoot down one of the Tomcats. And the Tomcats, they blow one of these things, they blow them both up. For the sake of time, I'll skip some of the details, but they blow them both up. One of the pilots survives. One of the Japanese pilot takes a dump and a drink. And on the film, this helicopter arrives. This guy's never seen anything like this. Think of his paradigm. He doesn't even know what this is. The helicopter, upside down egg beater, sweeps in over top of this guy who's bobbing up and down in the ocean, who thinks he's going to drown at any minute. This thing drops a device to pick him up. He picks him up. They put this guy in the back of the chopper, and they fly him to the Nimitz. And they let him off. When this Japanese pilot steps out of the chopper onto the Nimitz and sees all these Tomcats and all these missiles that you can fire from miles away blowing people out of the sky, he realizes that not one of the airplanes on the carriers he just left is going to get anywhere near Pearl Harbor. You know what happened at that moment? He went through a paradigm shift. 2 hours earlier, he was part of this huge task force, and he viewed himself as part of this power military arsenal that they were going to go out and kick butt. He went through about a 90-minute experience, ended up stepping down onto the deck of the Nimitz and went through a paradigm shift. And the paradigm shift is that he realized that the basis upon which everything to do with naval warfare and warfare at sea and the fighting of airplanes shifted. It's no longer the same. So he found out that he and his task force weren't and aren't as tough as they thought they were. You get the picture? That's a fabulous movie if any get a chance to see it. This is the Virginia. This was the first ironclad ship, warship ever built. Pardon me, that ever got into a